The purpose of my talk is to briefly talk about bridging uh, two events that have been going on at the same time. One of them is the tourism industry, and the other one is tourism studies or academic attention given to tourism. And in order to do that, I'm going to just have to give a very brief history of tourism development as an industry and as an as an academic field, so that we are on the same page. I'm not going to go to the beginning of tourism because that would take us forever to talk about the history of tourism. But I jumped to World War II that ruined all the economies and ruined what we call today attractions. Everything was bombed. And after the war was over, from the ashes of the war rose tourism that we called it. We called it tourism business then. And in English language, we call it tourism industry today. And Europe basically started pushing tourism forward just to rebuild the economy, which was totally ruined, and turned a business to an industry. And this became to the forefront in 1960s when economists began to document, to quantify the size of the tourism industry. And we owe a lot to economists for making tourism visible in the economies and in the field of studies. Then in in the 60s, it was all economics of tourism, jobs, multiplier effect, etc., etc. 1970s, other social sciences started paying attention, especially sociologists, anthropologists, and said, yes, tourism is wonderful, it brings money, but it can cause problems, social cultural problems. But nobody paid attention to that call, and eventually we saw that happening later on, that call should have been answered. In 1980s, we had seen the best part of tourism, the positives and the negatives. So most of the articles, most of the studies, the tourism industry started talking about adaptation of tourism. So that's the time that ecotourism became more popular, adventure tourism became popular, rural tourism became popular. So it started going in different directions, and different forms of tourism were given birth to and expanded. In 1990s, knowledge-based get strength. More universities opened their doors to hospitality and tourism research and education. And jumping to the next era of the 2000s onward, present century, tourism grabbed the attention of the public, sometimes for good reasons and sometimes for bad reasons, especially for bad reasons. When SARS happened, tourism was paralyzed, and suddenly people realized that it is an economic giant. Or to make the story short, COVID happened, and suddenly economies, government realized that this is a giant industry. It's not just a few hotels and a few restaurants. So in a way, COVID did wonders for tourism, for bringing it to the top of realizing that it is a major source of economic activity in all 193 countries of the United Nations. There is no country in the world which is not involved in tourism, either inbound, outbound, both of them. So we learned something about the popularity of tourism, importance of it, and also the resiliency of it. Tourism is back. Tourism came back after 3 years of hibernation, and it is in Mallorca. It's just like before COVID. I think we're almost there with the level of tourism return, not only in Spain but practically everywhere. So we learned how resilient tourism is, and we learned also something else during this era, that the worst enemy another worst enemy of tourism is war and conflicts. As soon as war checks in, tourism checks out. As soon as war checks out, tourism checks in. So it's always in that relationship which is going on. So we got some internal knowledge about tourism. We knew, but we got confirmation. So both of them had humble beginning, but many people don't realize how big tourism is, including some people in the tourism education and industry itself. Whenever you and I write an article and we want to talk about the bigness of tourism, we refer to the UNWTO, which is now called UN Tourism Institution, to their data to say how much tourism has been generated. And usually we talk about international tourism that last year, this year, for example, is already 1.5 billion international travel. And that's where we stop. We say that many international tourists travel. But this is only 5% of tourism. International tourism is only 5%. So if you really want to say how big it is, talk about the other 95%, which is domestic tourism. Can you imagine how many people travel in China? It's more than 5 billion arrivals, trips. The same thing in India, the same thing USA, Canada, Australia, even in the small countries. If you add those up, it's the 95%. And that is where the real size of tourism comes to the forefront. Tourism did so wonderful on the campuses, and despite its humble beginning with a journal or two, today we have more than 400 journals committed to the study of tourism. According to a study that Dr. Bob McCratcher did in the year 2021, more than 10,000 academic articles were published. So my question is, what percentage of these articles do you think the industry has read? I'm more than willing, I would be a daring person to say not even 1%. Actually, I can turn the table around and say, what percentage of the 10,000 articles we read, we the people in academic community, give us 1%. If we read 1%, it means we have read 100 articles. I have not. I don't know about you. So as you can see, in the tourism industry, in tourism education, the knowledge is being circulated rather than being transferred to the industry that is serving has a main mission. So moving on, I would like to suggest these are all opinion. It's an opinion-based lecture I'm giving. We must bridge these two flows. The industry on one hand going on its own without depending on the academic community, and academic community working on its own without referring regularly on the tourism industry. So there are two streams that are going in the same direction and they are not bridged. And I think we should be bridging them, and that's where my bridging idea comes about, to bridge tourism theory and practice. And I suggest a few things that should be there, but they are not there. The reason that those 10,000 articles are not read, or a portion of them are not read by the tourism industry, is because they are too long and the language is very complex. We do not know how to, we academic people do not know how to write short articles. So writing short articles, reducing 20,000 words article to 500, maximum 1,000, this is an art, and most of the academic people do not have that talent or are not willing to do it. The reason that some of the tourism academic people don't do that is because the university does not recognize that as a contribution, gives them no credit. But why don't we look at across over our shoulders, on the same campus, have a look at the School of Music, Theater, and Fashion. Do they really publish 10,000 academic articles per year? They don't. Do they get promotions? Yes, they do. Do they get raises? They do. So how can we make this a limitation for the tourism education, that we must publish academic or in reference journals? If they could do it on campuses, we can do it, and short articles would be acceptable. To recognize that, we must recognize that intelligence consists not only of knowledge, but also of the ability to apply knowledge in practice. I didn't say that. Aristotle said that more than 300 years before Christ. And we are not doing that. Tourism was there during the time of Aristotle, but we have not internalized this message that our knowledge needs to be applied. Time to recognize that tourism is a hands-on and minds-on industry. And we, in academic community, we have made it more minds-on rather than hands-on. Some programs in tourism do hands-on more, like hotel restaurant management. Tourism, I think tourism should function like other fields of studies and practice like medical and engineering. They are well connected. Universities are well connected to the industry, and the traffic of knowledge is going back and forth. We should learn from them and do the same. Time for academicians to expand curriculum. In the old days, we had social sciences in tourism. Today, if we do, it's only a course in economics. Do we require courses in sociology, anthropology, psychology, political science? We don't. But tourism is all of those. So we should be teaching those as well if we want to close the gap. This allows the people whom we are educating to enter the tourism industry to have the ability of empathizing of understanding who the tourists are, what they want, understanding who they are and what they want, understanding what the host community expects and how to respond to that, and how does the government performs and expects from tourism. These four stakeholders in tourism have to be studied all the time. I'm more than willing to bet with you that, and you know better yourself, that more than 90% of articles that we publish are tourist-centered. What percentage are host-centered? Or what percentage is study of ourselves, the people working in the tourism industry? For the industry has to make motions as well. The industry also has to recognize that tourism is not investment in tourism is investment, not expenditure. The training in tourism industry is still considered as expense, but it is investment. And the industry has to recognize it. Time to recognize that women are populating the tourism industry. Look at your classrooms and look at the flow of women in the tourism industry. Are we prepared for this level of management, which is going to be from top to top? I'm not talking about low-level jobs. I'm talking about top-level jobs, which are being occupied by women, and more so in the future. So we have to think about the nature and changing nature of tourism. We have to ask our governments to stop lionizing big industries of tourism. Ministries of tourism always go after big things, the big destinations in their own countries. But tourism is made up of a lot of small operations, entrepreneurial. So when the government lionizes tourism and capitalizes on the big cities and big chain hotels that they have, the small ones are being ignored. And the small ones are the majority of the tourism industry, the entrepreneurs, the hotels with 10 rooms, the restaurants with 10 seats. They are when you add them up, they are the majority, and they'll be ignored. Universities should open their doors to professional professors. How many if you are in education yourself, among your colleagues, how many of them are professional professors, i.e. they have years of experience, but they don't have PhD? How many of those do we have? Time to do that. And it's also time for us, when we go on sabbatical leaves, don't go to another university, go to the industry. Well, I'm preaching that myself, but I didn't do it myself either. No, I know I made a mistake. When I went for my sabbatical leave, I came actually to Spain for my sabbatical leave, and then I returned to Portugal, two different universities. So I think we should also do our best to go to the industry for our sabbatical leaves and have them to come to us to teach as professional professors. Time for professors to act as thesis advisors, not as thesis advisors, but as coaches. We have to coach them because I'm emphasizing practice in tourism. Time for participation in selecting applicants who are applying to enter hospitality and education. The tourism industry should help the academicians to select the next person who is going to enter the field of study in tourism. We should give more credit to applicants who have experience. We only look in most campuses, I have to say, we look at the good grades. If they have good grades, they become good students. Maybe so, but not necessarily in hospitality and tourism. Time to emphasize sociocultural, multiculturalism and multilingualism. This is extremely important in tourism. How many of the university degree programs in hospitality and tourism require a second language or a third language? Very few do that. We should do that, and they have to become multicultural because tourism is a multicultural industry. Even in a hotel, we have multinationality of employees as well as the tourist. Time to become sustainable in tourism, not only in the sense of business, but in sense of climate change. Actually, I came to Mallorca because the UN Tourism had a big conference here on sustainability, and that was the theme of the whole two-day conference. And this kind of things are all over, and we have to start. The tourism industry has to learn about sustainability. How much of sustainability do we have in our curriculum? I think we have very limited. So if we don't prepare the next generation who are entering field of tourism to think sustainable and act sustainable, they will not. That we people should also realize that our responsibility is not limited to the tourists, but we have responsibility to the host community. Host community is almost always ignored and not studied. So we have to think about their quality of time. They need to be happy. Just see what is happening here in Mallorca. People are local people have started rejecting tourism. In Barcelona, the same thing happening. In Venice, in Dubrovnik, I can go on and on. The reason is that we people have ignored the host community to whose territory we are lodging. Time to work not time to work for tourists, but to work with tourists. And that's a different mentality. Time to recognize that hospitality means passionality. People who are not passionate in this field, they cannot succeed. I'm talking about practice. In academic, you could be a boring person and very productive. That's a different story. And we have to give more relevance to hospitality education, because hospitality is the soul, the character of tourism, and tourism is the body. So if we just study tourism without its a spirit, then it's a service industry, not hospitality. And finally, I don't know how I'm doing time-wise. My final point, we have to. I want to re-emphasize the point that the host and guest must be in the center of tourism studies. And I came up with a motto that I would like to promote, which reads as following: a nice place to live is a nice place to visit, and vice versa. If we achieve this, we have really achieved a lot in the field of tourism as an industry, in the field of education as an academic field, and we have started bridging. So we need to think about the well-being and per capita happiness of the local people due to tourism. Actually, I have proposed a study to UN Tourism, and are considering it right now, that the main four stakeholders in tourism: tourist, host, employees, and government, are studied annually to see how their attitude, aptitude, and appetite for tourism is changing. and make arrangements. So I hope I stayed within my time limit, so we have time for discussion. Thank you very much.
You did. Thank you very much, Professor Jafari, for that very insightful and interesting talk, which I personally thoroughly enjoyed. And to be honest with you, I feel like I'm guilty of like just pumping out sometimes research without really thinking about, yes, but what is the impact of my research? What is this contribution? You know, what benefits does it bring to communities? So I'm personally guilty of that. And I think we should really think about what contributions our research are actually making to society or to industry, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you very much for that. So I think this then kind of is a good time to bridge it with Carla's talk, who's kindly agreed to present a case study of her research, focusing on how then we can intentionally design research that can help reduce some of social inequities in tourism. So, Carla, thanks very much for agreeing to speak to us today. So I'll pass to you, and then at the end of the session, hopefully we'll have some time for discussion.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Masood. Thanks for having me. So my plan was to just kind of walk through a couple of examples based on projects I've been working on to identify how my work has kind of centered praxis. So I'll just start off by saying that I use a social justice orientation in my work. I'm really interested in identifying some of the inequities that exist and then responding. I've been using feminist theory over the last few years, and feminist theory really resonates with me and the work that I've been doing because it really encourages a multidimensional understanding of experiences. I really think that feminist research is different because some of the social commitments are central. It seeks to expose and remedy some gender inequities that exist. And considers opportunities to contribute to a better world, which I think is really kind of, resonates with what Jafar shared. Over the last few years, I've been working with a number of equity deserving groups, including women, youth activists, older adults, and also Indigenous partners. So I thought I'd focus on some of my work, specifically working with women in tourism and also some of the Indigenous partners that we've been working with over the last few years. I think my interest specifically working with women in tourism stemmed from a couple of different experiences. One, after I had children, I became really interested in gender equity, and I really kind of focused on some work on campus at the University of Waterloo. So I was interested after I had my first child in understanding how pre-tenured and recently tenured women on campus negotiate going on to their parental leave and then returning back to work. So what we did is we carried out a number of interviews, 15 interviews with women across campus to understand what their experiences were like. We used a phenomenological approach. So we're really interested in understanding the essence of the lived experiences of women. And the term negotiation was important because I thought it was when we applied for some of the funding, we applied for 2 gender equity studies grants on campus. I was thinking about the personal negotiation. How do pre-tenured and recently tenured women negotiate kind of internally what they're going to work on, or if they're not going to work on anything before they go on to leave? And I just assumed that every other woman on campus had it all figured out, and then learned that the 15 women that we interviewed had quite similar experiences to my own. And so we learned that there was inconsistent and misaligned messaging happening on campus, and administrators on campus weren't equipped with the information and the knowledge, and particularly around the policy that we have for parents going on leave. We learned in our analysis that some women felt pressured to actually leave their parental leave early to return back to work based on pressure they were receiving from colleagues and administrators. Anxiety was experienced by a lot of our informants, particularly when they were returning back to work. And so what this resulted in is 9 recommendations that we made to different departments and units across campus. And we did a number of workshops where we shared back the key insights. And I worked really closely with the Faculty Association on campus to reform the parental leave policy on campus. And so we went from having the worst policy and one of the worst policies in Canada for parental leave. We were on the bottom few, and now we're in the top 3 in Canada. And as a critical scholar, oftentimes we're told to engage in policy reform, engage in changing policy. And so I was quite proud of this work. But I did a presentation recently at the University West of Scotland, and I talked about some of the concerns that I have and how the change of policy has actually, I think, contributed to greater inequities, which requires more attention. But this particular work that I was engaged in led me to engage in other work based on gender inequities and gender barriers that exist. And I recently worked with some colleagues, and I'm still working with them in Spain, that was looking at the gender barriers in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Barcelona specifically. And so what our work did was carry out interviews, again, using feminist theory with individual stakeholders who were involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Barcelona. And so what we were interested in doing is talking to venture capitalists and women entrepreneurs, people in the university and the broader industry, and kind of really lean into what the inequities are, how it's difficult to engage in entrepreneurship, and what we can do about that. So we created a model that really kind of reinforces the importance of engaging with the causes of gender inequities within the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Barcelona. And then attend to that by developing responses to the gender barriers, and then design some equity responses, and then inform policy. So design some policy responses. My work, I've been working with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals over the last since 2015 when they came about. And what we've noticed in the literature are some specific gaps, particularly SDG 5, which is focused on gender equality. And also SDG 17 has been under-researched in the tourism scholarship, which is focused on partnerships. So obviously, because this particular study was focused on a Spanish context, I became very interested in what the circumstances might be like in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Canada. And then with SDG 17 in mind in terms of partnerships, there's really a lack of evidence in the literature about cross-border partnerships and how the North can work with the South. And as a consequence, we're now carrying out a cross-case analysis between the Canadian entrepreneurial ecosystem, the Spanish entrepreneurial ecosystem, with a partner in Mexico to understand the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Mexico as well, with the hope that we might create, we'll learn best practices from each of our cases, and also understand how we might be able to collaborate and work together. I had a SHIRK Insight grant, Insight Development Grant, that I've just wrapped up. It was focused on mapping kind of the entrepreneurial ecosystem across Canada and understanding generally the social impacts of tourism social entrepreneurs. So I was interviewing both men and women about their experiences and how some of the social impacts that they're making align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I was interested in that based on creating almost like a repository of best practices. But it was at this time where I was carrying out this study with my colleagues in Barcelona, focused on the gender inequities that exist in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, that I became really interested in kind of narrowing in on some of those gender inequities that might exist here in Canada. So we're carrying out this cross-case analysis right now. I recently secured an early researcher award This is really stemming from the gender equity work on campus that I was working with, that's informed policy change at our university, and also the work with my Spanish colleagues. The focus of my early research award is focusing on an intersectional feminist lens. So I'm really interested in the multiple barriers that entrepreneurs may face as a consequence of their intersectional identities. So what we also learned with the research that we were doing in Canada on generally on tourism social entrepreneurs is that the food and beverage sector has received quite a lot of attention when it comes to tourism entrepreneurship. So because I'm in at the University of Waterloo, living in Waterloo, Ontario, we're recognized as a Silicon Valley of the North. And so the tech industry was right under my nose. And so I became wrapped into this grant, a focus on tech tourism entrepreneurs between the Toronto-Waterloo corridor. So that's the focus of the grant, is looking specifically using an intersectional feminist lens to understand the barriers that tech entrepreneurs may face. I think what's really important part of this grant, and I'm only a few months in, we just received it on the 1st of January, and it goes until 2029, is that one of the knowledge translation pieces focuses on disseminating our research to children in elementary schools. And I come from a family of teachers. My brother is an elementary school teacher, my sister teaches in a high school, and both my parents are retired teachers. And this was only worth $5,000 of the $250,000 grant. And I got really excited about designing this particular part of the project. So every year, funds are released, particularly for disseminating our key insights and key findings at the elementary school level. We had to design some curriculum, basically. And so I'm quite excited about this. I haven't been to the elementary school or any elementary schools yet, but once we have completed the first objective, we hope to do that. And this is supposed to happen once per year for the next 5 years. So I think that's an important knowledge translation piece and praxis piece, particularly because if young people are aware of some of the gender barriers that exist in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, maybe we can confront that early on. The other project I wanted to mention is some relationship development work that I've been doing with Six Nations. I'm from a small city called Brantford. It's about 80,000 people in Southern Ontario. And I grew up there, and it's right beside Six Nations. We had very limited formal education about Indigenous peoples in Canada when I was in elementary school and also high school. And so as a consequence of, the work that we're doing to learn about decolonialism, we're engaged in self-learning and also relationship development towards progressing reconciliation. This has been a really meaningful project for me. So we received a My Tax Accelerate grant in 2022, and this grant goes until 2026. My tax grants are focused on industry community partnerships. And so we're also working with the Regional Tourism Organization in Waterloo as well, RTO4. So this project is focused on a couple of case studies on regenerative tourism, particularly recognizing that there aren't a lot of case studies generally on regenerative tourism. And also there are there's limited research in regenerative tourism that focuses on Indigenous worldviews. So this has been important for us. So the case study that we're focused on is called the Grand River Community Play Project, which adds an additional layer. There's not a lot of case studies generally in the regenerative tourism literature. There's hardly anything in the Canadian context. And then moving beyond that, there's really nothing that stems beyond just one singular community. So we're interested in how this play project that's going to occur next summer, but there's been several prologues trying to generate interest and also engage participants over the last couple of years. We wanted to talk about how it's bringing communities together and actually enhancing where tourism takes place. So we've been building relationships with the manager of Six Nations Tourism, Jackie Jameson, as well as a couple of entrepreneurs who started Two Row on the Grand, which is one of the Indigenous worldviews that we're using to the Two Row Wampum Treaty, which is focused on relationship building and allyship between Indigenous partners and settler allies. So we've been working with our Indigenous partners we've been building relationships with them for the last, I would say, 3 years now. And it's making a case for regenerative tourism. I think we've been really intentional about the methodological choices we've been using. It probably goes without saying that we're using decolonial theory. I think the feminist theory perspective has been a great education for me in terms of how to approach the relationship building with our partners. But we wanted to decenter Eurocentric and North American knowledge hierarchies. And so we're really intentional with using decolonial theory. We've been using community-based participatory action research with this project. And there's so many reasons why. I'm not a sprinter. I'm more of a long distance endurance runner. And I think that this was important kind of work for me up until this point. Because we have mutual interest coming into the project. Our Indigenous partners are feeding in the questions that they have, and it's really kind of informing how the project unravels. Our research questions are co-designed with our partners, and we're really kind of focused on the long-term kind of engagement and relationship building, which is particularly important in thinking through reconciliation in Canada. And I think that that's like the key praxis here. Our relationship development is the probably the biggest impact that this research is going to make. Yeah, I think I'll maybe pause there to open up for questions in just a second. Masood, there's one slide. It's the very last slide that I shared. I think it dovetails really nicely with what Jafar was talking about in terms of centering praxis, thinking about our publications and the impact of them. We just had a publication and print yesterday, and it really kind of interrogates, it encourages us to think a little bit deeper about the impact of our work and the pressure on scholars to really kind of emphasize numbers in terms of our publications. And I published this with Stephanie Benjamin and Sean Lee. And I think really like we make a call for engaging in good trouble in tourism scholarship. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Carla. That was excellent. And I do apologize because like halfway through your presentation, I was like, I had one job to do and I didn't do that actually.
It's okay.
Which is to share this slide. So I do apologize. But to be honest with you, you did such an excellent job. I don't think you needed any PowerPoint slides. So that was excellent. I really enjoyed that. And I think for me personally, I think you did such an excellent job of like really complementing what Professor Jafari was saying earlier about, okay, so what? Like, why are we doing research? You know, who is it benefiting? And I think the title of your talk, which is like intentionally designing research, I think is so important, and I'm trying to get better at that. And hopefully other researchers in tourism will try better at, okay, why are we doing this research? Who is it benefiting? What are the implications of it? And so on. So I hope that the other participants in today's talks also like, you know, it made them think a little bit more about what kind of research they're designing and why they're doing those research. So thank you very much to you and to Professor Jafari for your very insightful talks. Really appreciate your time. So I think we have some time for questions. I'm going to put the link to your paper, Carla, in the chat. So if people want to follow up on that, you know, they can, if you don't mind.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think there are a couple of questions, Professor Jafari, for you in the chat, and then we will just open up to the other participants as well if they want to ask any questions. So The first question is from Sanjay. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name properly, but Sanjay is asking Professor Jafari, to what extent you think are the UN tourism goals, which I'm assuming is UN Sustainable Development Goals, consist with what you're talking about here? Is it possible to have sustainable tourism with the current UN tourism goals and tourism that will take care of the locals and not just the tourists?
Well, excellent question. But I'm not in the business of predicting. I don't know what the future is holding. We have the conversation, but we should walk our talk. We just often talk about it, and in article after articles, and the industry also acknowledges it and does something in along those lines if that helps the generate additional income. They are not willing to, the industry being a business as they are not willing to make sacrifices. So that requires culture change. Culture change for everybody to understand what climate change is and what part each one of us can play. If the tourism industry becomes very climate change oriented entity and does everything properly, etc., but how can we be sure that the tourists who come to our properties are using the same philosophy? The problem is that people at home might be very ecologically oriented. 11 months per year, they sort the garbage, they do this and they don't do that, and so on and so forth. But when they go on a vacation, they say, give me a break. Let me do things the way I want. So they overeat, they shower, they do over everything. So how do we bring this about? Because we promised in tourism, we promised them a non-ordinary situation to expand yourself, your thoughts and your action. But the climate change is about limiting options. So I really don't know how this is going to work out. All I can say is that we are giving it a try, and UN Tourism has had a number of conferences on this and will continue to do so. As you all know, the UN Tourism is the same as UNWTO, changed name just recently, and it's an institution working under the umbrella of tourism. So, like, the question is to ask how practical UN itself is in conflict resolutions and the like. So I don't know. All I can say is that we are conscious of the challenge, but I don't know how much progress we are having presently.
Thanks very much, Professor Jafar. And there is I mean, the questions are coming thick and fast. I'm a bit mindful of time, and I'm sure there are other questions for Carla as well. But another question that I promised that I will ask is let me see. Sorry, yeah. How do you see the future of tourism graduates? I know you said you're not in the business of predicting the future, but I think the question is, where do you see the future of tourism graduates, like PhD degrees? Do you see it necessary at all? Or, do you think that we should shift towards more like practitioner-based degrees?
Well, as I say, my talk is opinion piece, not based on proper methodology, collecting data, representing. I'm not the voice of the academic community. I'm my own voice based on my experience and feedback. Yes, we have to realize that tourism is a hands-on and a minds-on industry. Unfortunately, if we go on the basis of the articles that we publish, it's more minds-on, not hands-on. But tourism is a service industry, it's a do industry, not think industry. It should be both. But as I already mentioned, hotel and restaurant management managed to keep their hands on education more than the tourism industry in general. And I think we should follow the model of hotel and restaurant management and staying in close contact with the tourism industry to graduate the students that they can absorb and can hire and make their management system easier and better.
Thank you very much, Professor Jafari, for that. And Carlo, we have a question for you from Nino. So Nino is asking, how can indigenous communities reclaim and reshape their narratives by using their own voices? And what impacts does this have on the preservation and representation of their cultural heritage, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of our colleagues in Oklahoma, Bobby Chu Bigby, is working on some partnerships with indigenous communities about indigenous resurgence. And I think this is really quite important. What's happening in Canada specifically is in 2015, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission start to attend to the truth in terms of how Indigenous peoples have been treated over the last 100 years with the residential schools. We really hadn't kind of like reckoned with the intergenerational kind of impacts of the residential school system. I think that this resurgence, as Bobby Chu Bigby talks about in her research with Freya Higgins Dubois, is starting to happen. You know, in terms of reclaiming their voice and space. I mean, I think we all have work to do. There's 94 calls to truth and reconciliation in Canada. There's a lot of work for settler allies to engage in, and I think that's our it's our responsibility as settler allies in Canada and the United States, Australia. You know, we often talk about land acknowledgements are oftentimes presented at the beginning of presentations or meetings that we have, but we have to move beyond the land acknowledgement because, you know, as I've learned in relationship development with our community partners, that really what's important is to progress in reconciliation is talk about the action, which I think you were really trying to encourage us to talk about today. So like what in praxis, how are we going to get to reconciliation? We're going to get to reconciliation in Canada by listening and understanding the truth of our Indigenous peoples and also working together to respond to those calls to action.
May I add to this comment? The same question could be rephrased and say, how could the host community have its own discourse and discussion on the subject of tourism? The voice of the tourism industry is not heard. And when it is heard, the tourism industry, tourism educators, they say that they are not informed about tourism. Tourism is better and more than what they are suggesting. But the host community's narrative is as real as it is unless we change their minds. I mean, the indigenous people that you have in Canada, we have in USA, and Aboriginals we have in Australia, their view is the view unless we can show them otherwise. So we have to work with their view. If the host community is not, the host community in tourism is not happy by simply seeing jobs generated and money coming and thousands of tourists coming, we have to see what is that they don't like about their own, what is happening to their everyday life. And especially now that even the hidden parts of the cities and destinations are penetrated by Airbnb, there is no privacy left anywhere in tourism destinations. So we have a difficult situation now, and we are not trying to assess the message, the narrative, the demand, expectations of the host community.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Carlo and Professor Jafari, for that. So I think, I don't know how we're doing for time, Sandro. Like, do we have time for another question, or do we need to kind of conclude right now?
If you want to have one more question, okay, a couple of minutes.
Yep. So we've got a couple more minutes for any other questions. If there are any, one last question for either Carlo or
Masood, there's
yes.
one interesting. It talks about how we can connect theories with practitioners.
Okay.
Yeah, not in the ideal world. Most sectors in tourism do not listen to scholars, and they think that scholars know nothing. So it can be very challenging. So obviously, I think that's probably connected to how do we develop trust. But I'm wondering, Carla, how did you start this engagement with communities?
I think coming at my work with a feminist lens, I think that's been really important for guiding how I engage in relationship development. For example, we're using decolonial theory and post theories really, but I think it's really like engaging with care ethics and demonstrating care for your partners. I think is really important and probably like the foundational starting point for engaging with community partners. I think that the point that I was making about taking up community-based participatory action research, like focusing on long-term commitments to relationship building, we can't be in and out. I think that's the biggest critique, and particularly if you take a look at the decolonial theory, like research is a really dirty word in Indigenous communities because of the fact that non-Indigenous peoples have kind of viewed Indigenous peoples as like a point of collecting data. So I think we have to be incredibly conscientious about building relationships, being attentive to what they want out of the relationship. And I mean, obviously we're publishing we're co-creating the research with our Indigenous partners and attending to their needs along the way.
If I may add to that, as long as the Indigenous people or host community do not think that the researcher is one of them, they are not going to open the doors. I'm anthropologist. In anthropology, we settle in the community for 6 months. I didn't do that myself, but anthropology does. They get to know the village or the destination. They become a member of the village. They speak like them. They think like them, and then they are trusted. But us going and knocking on their doors and asking, we want to do research on you for your benefit, is not the right way of doing it, and it's not going to happen.
I was on mute there. Thank you very much, Professor Jafari and Carla. I personally thoroughly enjoyed your talks, so I really appreciate the time that you've dedicated. I know how busy you both are.